Hello, everyone. Ian Antonio Pattison again for the English Coach podcast, Living the Language. Now, I'm going to try to do a really short one today that is going to last as long as it takes me to eat 2 scoops of ice cream. So, here we go. Yesterday, I had 2 insights that might be interesting to anyone looking to improve their English, or for podcasters, or even anyone who's involved in post-processing of creative work. Jetzt ganz kurz auf Deutsch. Gestern hatte ich 2 Erkenntnisse, die für alle interessant sein könnten, die ihre Englisch verbessern wollen, für Podcaster und alle, die sich mit der Nachbereitung kreativer Arbeit beschäftigen. Alright, no worries, that was just a small introduction for my German listeners. I do have a lot of German listeners, so that was for you. But the episode today, again, is going to be a short one, and it's going to be in English. All right, now the first insight that I had yesterday had to do with podcast editing, which I think should be approached with 2 mindsets for the different phases of the editing process. At first, or well, it could also be the other way around, but firstly, or one of the phases is editing the podcast for the structure of the recording itself. I mean, looking at things like levels, recording errors, sound distractions, and sound quality. The other phase, and again, as I said, they can be done in the other order, so to speak. The other phase would involve editing for the structure of the message content itself, such as disfluences, fill words, digression, succinctness of arguments, etc. How you put the argument together. And why is that all important? I've read it somewhere and I've heard many times that multitasking doesn't really exist. If you're doing 2 things at one time, then one of these things is gonna suffer. And the idea of work-life balance, yes, it's being sold by a lot of people, but a lot of people that I know, they say to me, well, I don't really think that there is any balance. There is a consistent balancing act. You try to achieve this ideal, but it's not really something that is achievable for most of us. So I say all of that to say this, some things need individual focus and a different mindset, so to speak, for each sub-goal as you work on it. Now, these phases of awareness have to be separated because, for example, if you're listening to the content of a podcast message, your brain might ignore the sound quality issues. And if you're listening for sound quality issues, you might not recognize that the arguments are poorly structured. I'm sure we've all been there. You hear the song and you like it because it sounds so good. But one day when you really check the text or the lyrics, you find out that the singer was only saying rubbish or nothing at all. I think there's this song called Lighter Shade of Pale. As far as I remember, I don't think that song is actually saying anything, but it sounds wonderful. Anyway, the same applies to language. Sometimes a grammatically correct structure or grammatically correct language, or language that strictly adheres to some extrinsic standard or the other, is not always the easiest to understand. Think of the language of law or politics or even privilege and entitlement and status. Now, simply said, a relatively poor person doesn't necessarily understand when a relatively rich person says in very eloquent ways that the key to happiness is positive thoughts and positive visualization, and that money isn't everything. Yeah, the underprivileged person doesn't necessarily understand that at all. And if you even go further, being a little bit playful there, but let's look at 2 preferred standards. There are, for example, many American and British slang or informal terms that are perfectly acceptable for spoken language but unacceptable for passing an English test. Americans sometimes reject or flatly massacre the perfect forms and say things like, you shouldn't have went, or you should have went, or they might say even, I would never have thunk it. I find that one really funny. And The word ain't is not a word. Ain't doesn't exist, people. Don't use it unless, you're in some kind of cool crowd where it will be accepted. Do not write the word AIN apostrophe T on any English test unless you're sure that you're going to have some kind of cool teacher who is going to overlook that and, basically give you good grades for, I don't know, winning brownie points in the cool crowd or something. Anyway, do not use ain't. Take it from me, it does not exist. Now, there are some other examples. For example, some British add, what I would refer to as a second guttural G to words like singer. So what you hear is singer. Yes, singer. Yeah, I find that also quite interesting. I'm not going to say it's bad or anything like that, but it's just a little bit confusing for someone who might be learning English as a second language and is trying to spell that word. Now, both American and British twangs, I would say, sometimes add an R where it doesn't exist. At the ends of words like law and idea and saw. So what you might hear is, for law, you would hear lore, and idea, you'd hear idea, and for saw, as in past tense of see, I saw it. Yeah, I also find that very interesting. Now, again, if you want to talk like that, it's fine. It will probably help you to fit into, whatever crowd you're using informal language in, and it's perfectly fine. If it works for you, go for it. But again, do not add R to the word saw, idea, or law on an English test. It won't win you any points. Now, another interesting thing, I'm Jamaican, so, it would be unfair for me not to make fun of myself as well. If you were to listen to a Jamaican and a British talking about the difference between the word bacon and beer can, then you'd probably have some fun. Now, truth be told, the Jamaican beer can, you would hear beer can, that is Jamaican. I wouldn't call it English really, but it's a dialect. And a Jamaican in very informal settings would say beer can. Yes. And I would say that is actually definitely a step away from English. And a dialect, that's what I would call it. And it goes even further into the realms of what you would call a baselect. And the baselect is like very far from, any kind of standard. And the baselect would say something simply like pork fat, which just means fat of the pork. Or if you go into the popular vernacular, somebody might even say dat, yes, which just means that. And it comes from actually this song that was popular. I think it was in the 70s, where this guy was, he's not supposed to eat pork for religious reasons, but he wants to communicate to the meat seller that he wants to buy some. Yes, so he doesn't say pork and he doesn't say bacon or bacon. He just says he wants some of that. And that in the Jamaican dialect would be dat. So from dat to pork fat to bacon to bacon. All right? I find that really funny. Whatever the case is, English it's a wonderful language. It's spoken by many people all over the world. And maybe it is this kind of flexibility that also plays a part, of course, in addition to the colonial history and so on. But the flexibility of the language also plays a part in the fact that it is so widely accepted and spoken as a native language by so many countries, not only countries like Britain and America and Canada and so on, but many other countries. In Jamaica as well, English is our standard. So what is the moral of the story? The moral of the story here today in this very short episode is knowing your purpose and changing accordingly or adapting accordingly is the best approach that will serve you best. Keyword in this case, formal or informal. The more formal you get, the more you will also recognize that English is one language And anyone trying to tell you that there are two, for example, US English and UK English, they're probably trying to sell you something. There are a few differences, of course. There are preferences. For example, as I said earlier, the British do not reject the perfect forms and the Americans do. There are many things that you can express in a very, very, very similar way by avoiding the perfect form. You can just use simple past. You do not have to use the perfect form all the time. But the perfect does have its place. It is a richer form of communication. But that being said, English is one language. Yes, it's not. Don't let anybody tell you that there are two or three types of English. The more formal you get, once you get to, formal speech or writing, the more you will recognize that the English or the language is one and the same. All right, so as I said, it's a short one today. I hope you enjoyed it. I also hope the podcasters out there got some insight or learned something from what I said. There is not gonna be a video exclusive today, but you can still head on over to www.englishcoachpodcast.com and check out the show notes for the other episodes I've done. There have been quite a few interesting ones recently, and there are some really nice musical ones coming up soon. There are two coming up soon that I can definitely recommend that you don't want to miss. They are musical in wonderful ways, and I really don't want you to miss them, right? So you can subscribe from anywhere, but of course, always you can start at www.englishcoachpodcast.com, where you can also sign up to get the episodes sent to you directly by mail if you do not want to have to install some other funny podcast player or something. All right. So again, as I always say on my podcast, with a small win is always a good way to begin. I am looking forward to hearing from you, and bye for now.